Oh, hello there. You know, aviation enthusiasts at various stages of our lives have all been asked this common icebreaker. What's your favorite plane? For most, when you're a kid at least, this is not a hard question to answer. Typically, the decision is based solely on which plane looks the coolest to you. Seems totally reasonable, right? Right. Well, I was already a weird kid, but I really did not help myself when my answer was this thing. I didn't even know the name. Granted, I was 7 or 8, so conversations on planes were very surface level at this point. However, when your answer is the weird Italian one, it doesn't spark confidence in the random family member who was just trying to strike up a conversation with the child having an intense dogfight on the floor during the family reunion. Of course, I figured my stuff out and did manage to have a coherent answer. Complicated, sure, but coherent. It was also right around this time when I learned that when a girl asks you this question, seemingly at random, it isn't necessarily because she wants to hear your thought-out answer. Oops. I'm getting sidetracked. Anyway, life was good. As soon as those memories were about to enter the void space of the distant past, it started to happen. I started noticing it again. It was small at first, but then it just kept happening. And soon, they were all around me. It was while I was working on another video when I noticed it. They had gotten in. Okay. Psst. Huh? Wait. Hold on. No. Hey. Wait. It was so long ago. No. No! It was this moment when I realized I had to tackle it head on. Arguably one of the finest torpedo bombers of World War II, seen as the very efficient SM-79 bomber. The SM-79-2 torpedo bomber was fairly successful thanks to its robustness and flying performance. It excelled at torpedo bombing, where it proved to be an unbeatable machine. The SM-79-2 torpedo bomber was unequal. In reference to its role as a torpedo bomber, in this capacity, the aircraft excelled, and many historians regard it as the finest torpedo bomber of the war. Was an excellent, efficient machine, and perhaps the most successful land-based torpedo bomber of the war. It had been undoubtedly one of the most successful warplanes evolved by the Italian aircraft industry. Well, crap. But also good. From surprises in quality to drama, the history of this aircraft is far more fascinating than I originally expected. The three-engine design of the SM-79 was one which Savoia Marchetti had mastered through their work in civil aviation throughout the 1920s and 30s. Savoia Marchetti had developed dozens of planes by 1934, most of them being flying boats, but the SM-79 would be their magnum opus. The aircraft was very versatile, covering a wide range of roles such as bomber, torpedo bomber, reconnaissance, and even ground attack. Many of Italy's most famed pilots would go on to fly the SM-79. The torpedo bomber squadrons of the Aeroaccelerati would garner near legendary status. The SM-79 would go on to represent wartime Italian aviation, just as the Lancaster, the Flying Fortress, or Bf-110 had for their respective nations. My name is the Flying Historian, and today I would like to share the story of the SM-79. So you may hear the aircraft we are discussing today being referred to by many names. In 1937, the Italian aviation company SIAI added Marchetti to their name, and so many planes that came after that point would be seen using the initials SM at the start of their name. The SM-79 debuted with the name S-79. Later models would be seen using the SM initials, but this is all to say that contemporary reference to this aircraft is interchangeable, and you'll hear that throughout the video. Finally, I don't speak a lick of Italian. I tried my best not to butcher the language, but if I mispronounce a word in a language I do not speak, I apologize in advance. I really did try to pronounce them as best I could. Thank you. Our story starts here. A baby boy is born on June 16, 1884, in the gorgeous ancient hilltop town of Cori, Italy. He was born to Baron Vincenzo and Giulia Canavari. He would be known as Alessandro Marchetti. He would attend primary school in Cori before leaving the middle-of-nowhere town he grew up in, relatable, to attend high school in Velletri. Marchetti would then enroll at the University of Rome, continuing with his pattern of running further north for higher education. He would graduate in 1910. While attending the University of Rome, Marchetti grew a fascination with the work of Italian aviation pioneer Mario Caldarara and his experiments, such as his Caldarara Guppi biplane. In 1909, Marchetti experienced the infancy of flight right before his eyes. Wilbur Wright and his amazing flyers had been invited to Italy to demonstrate at Cettocelle near Rome. In October 1910, Marchetti's love for aviation would eventually lead him to taking the brave leap. At this time, at least, look at these things. Taking to the skies aboard an early Farman. Very soon after his first flight, Marchetti started to design his own aircraft, such as the unique Chimera in around 1910. Couldn't verify an exact date for this one. Yeah, so what were you doing after college, huh? Probably a little easier being the son of a baron, so maybe not the most fair comparison. You know what? You're doing just fine, kid. During World War I, Marchetti would design the MVT fighter, an aircraft with a metal tube fuselage, the first of its kind for Italy. Now, there are events which took place between 1920 and 1930 that are all fascinating and well worth the read. However, I have another video in the works that will go into that. What we need to know for our purposes here is that on December 30th, 1921, Marchetti invested a lot of money into Società Idrovolante Alta Italia, SIAI, and would later become SIAI's technical director. Marchetti would mostly stay within the bounds of commercial aircraft or fast single-seat planes with a heavy focus on amphibious aircraft. He really liked his float planes. The world was his bathtub, and the ink in his pen the basis for the creation of the ducks he wished to fill the tub with. Some of these designs were quite unique, such as the catamaran hull of the S-55. However, it was in early 1934 when Marchetti had a tough breakup with water, which made him shift focus and design an aircraft that would cement his legacy. In the early 1930s, Marchetti had designed a few aircraft who were not flying boats. One such aircraft was the three-engine S-73 and militarized S-81 of the same design, both of which would go on to be speedy passenger cargo bomber aircraft, whichever floats your boat. Oh wait, sorry, I didn't mean to... Oh, and there he goes. These aircraft would be the basis that would bring a new age of flight to Italy. Though Marchetti wasn't quite satisfied with his design of the S-73, he wished to create a more aerodynamic, speedy-er passenger aircraft. Marchetti hoped to have this new aircraft available to participate in the very prestigious Mac Robertson Air Race from London, England to Melbourne, Australia, being held in October of 1934. Unfortunately, the plane would not be ready for the race by October, though she was ready to be presented. The S-79 took to the skies from Cameri Airport for the first time in October 1934 as a prototype high-speed passenger plane capable of carrying 8 passengers. The SM-79P, the prototype passenger variant with the civil designation IMAGO, which I will be pronouncing as IMAGO, haters be damned, was a mixed construction aircraft. It had a welded chrome molybdenum steel tube fuselage covered with plywood and fabric. Her wings were made of wood and also covered in fabric. IMAGO would prove itself worthy in a demonstration in June 1935. Powered by 3 610-horsepower Piaggio engines, IMAGO made a record-breaking flight from Milan to Rome. In the following month, on July 20th, 1935, the SM-79P would receive its certificate of airworthiness. The ball did not stop rolling there. In September of the same year, the Piaggio engines were switched for three 750 horsepower Alfa Romeo engines. This old girl and switching engines is like butter to toast. With a more powerful power plant, the SM79 would break a total of 6 world speed records during 620 and 1,240 mile closed circuits, carrying 1,100, 2,200, and 4,400 pound payloads. For example, on September 24, 1935, an SM79P achieved records for the 620 and 1,240 mile closed circuit races, carrying 2,200 pound payloads and an average speed of around 240 miles per hour. All the while, since October of 1934, pilots had been speaking highly of the aircraft, many commenting on its high top speed. In 1936, the SM79P was re-engined again, this time with the 780 horsepower Alfa Romeo 126 RC34 engine, and bettered its previous 620-mile closed-circuit record by carrying 4,410 pounds and an average speed of 266 miles per hour. Its racing legacy would continue into the following year. While commercial SM79Ps were being built, 16 of the military's SM79-1s were modified into 2 separate models to be placed into international aviation contests. These aircraft had been stripped of their military equipment and add-ons, such as the ventral gondola, and were fitted with the powerful 1,000 horsepower Piaggio P11 RC40 radial engine. 11 of these aircraft were modified to have more internal fuel capacity, turning them into the SM79T Transatlantico. The remaining 5 had been modified for speed and designated the SM79C Corsa, or race model. In 1937, SM79Cs won first, second, and third place in the 3,863-mile East Damascus-Paris race, averaging 217 miles per hour and 263 miles per hour between Istres and Damascus. The SM79C had beaten the very fast DH-88 Comet, GACSS. It's red and everything. Whew. Tough competition. In January 1938, the SM79 would do it again. Known as the Sorti Verde, Green Mice, this team completed a record 24-hour, 20-minute, 6,214-mile race from Rome to Rio de Janeiro at average speeds of around 250 miles per hour. The success of the Green Mice and their S-79 was hyped up by Italian and other fascist propagandists, which further cemented the S-79's legacy. The SM-79 would hold 26 international aviation records from 1937 to 1939, including the fastest medium bomber in the world. It would continue to take part in competitions from 1937 till 1940. The second prototype SM-79P was completed in 1935 and was ordered by the Regia Aeronautica to be built to the specifications of a medium bomber. Feelings surrounding the new craft were mixed. Many thought that important aspects of the aircraft were primitive. They didn't like the tri-motor configuration, preferring the more modern dual-motor medium bomber. They saw the handheld weapons fitted in open windows as archaic. They didn't like the tub which housed the bombardier, and they thought that the small central bomb bay which housed munitions vertically would make it an ineffective bomber. But those guys were the non-believers. Others saw the S-79 as a fantastic potential successor to the S-81 and a great contemporary aircraft for a modern fleet of bombers for the turn of the decade. They preferred its 3-engine arrangement for added survivability. Its proven record for impressive speed was seen as its greatest advantage over contemporary fighters. And if a fighter so chose to stand against the S-79 at high noon, then a fixed forward-firing machine gun would resolve that issue. Well, now that doesn't necessarily seem fair. The impressive feats of speed and performance, along with the consistent praise from test pilots, further convinced the armed forces to support the S-79. The need for a new fleet of modern bombers, as well as the voices of support, won over those who doubted the S-79. Some worried, though, that pilots would have significant trouble transitioning from lumbering 100-mile-per-hour airplanes to the 250-mile-per-hour S-79. The 12th Stormo Bombardamento was tasked with training pilots, many of whom were former fighter pilots, to fly the S-79. Starting in October of 1936, the Italian Air Force began to receive its first batch of SM-79-1s. The S-79 also benefited from a lot of luck, that luck coming in the form of the failure of your adversaries, the best kind of luck. The other contenders who were to modernize the Italian bomber force were the Fiat BR-20, Piaggio P-32, and the Caproni CA-135. Sorry, the Italian got the better of me. All three would have some serious issues during their development. The BR-20 is the only one of the three that you could consider as somewhat successful. It entered service a year after the S-79 in 1937, but its terrible 2 years lasted for quite some time. The P-32 was described by most pilots as a flying coffin, and the CA-135 would be plagued by power plant issues for much of its early career. Now, under modernization rearmament plans being implemented under fascist Mussolini, the S-79 was going to be the least produced of the four, just a complementary aircraft, preferring the more modern twin-engine bombers to bring Italy into the new age. But as dissatisfaction and production delays grew with Italy's twin-engine bombers, a door opened for the S-79 to take center stage. Even before the first batch of SM-79-1s had been delivered, the Regia Aeronautica ordered several more. Savoia Marchetti would have other Italian aviation companies license build S-79s, though production would be slow going throughout the late 1930s. Despite this fact, it seemed that the S-79 would be Italy's frontline bomber. Oh, and don't worry, the SM-79P was not entirely abandoned. Starting in 1937, the SM-83, the commercial cousin to its bomber parallel, would begin production. Similar to how our defense contractors today use international unrest as their testing beds, many German and Italian aircraft manufacturers of the time used the Spanish Civil War as a testing ground for new aviation technology and tactics. The Spanish Civil War gave the Regia Aeronautica a unique chance to test new warplanes under operational conditions. The Aviation Legionaria, the Air Force sent to Spain by Italy in support of the fascist government, received SM-79-1s once production had reached a solid tempo. Starting in February 1937, Italy witnessed, quote, considerable success, end quote. Throughout the conflict, the S-79 was one of the fastest and most advanced aircraft over the skies of Spain. Other than the Russian-built I-16 monoplane fighter, no other Republican fighter could compete. Starting in February 1937, SM-79s attacked Republican naval and Air Force targets, as well as bombing big cities such as Barcelona. Despite often encountering fierce ground defenses, SM-79s early in their deployment would return mostly undamaged. SM-79s would continue to have an impressive record throughout the conflict. For example, on the 21st of May 1937, 5 SM-79s of the 280th Squadriglia attacked the Republican battleship Jaime I, disabling her in Almeria harbor. The SM-79-1 proved capable of eluding many fighters of the time and built a reputation for being reliable and efficient. It had impressed the nationalist Spanish so much that they ordered a set of their own in 1937. Of the 99 S-79s who fought, 61 would survive. In September of 1940, the Italian government wished to get the public hyped for the air war. Being one of Italy's most prominent warplanes, the SM-79 would receive an official name, Sparvieri. One may also see Sparviero, meaning sparrowhawk. However, its official name never really caught on with pilots. They referred to their birds as the S-79, or a visual identifier. Unofficially, its other common name would be Gobo, or Hunchback. The name referred to its distinctive hump along the upper fuselage, present because of the addition of a forward-firing gun. Some sources say that crews also gave the aircraft other affectionate names: Gobo Maleto, or the cursed Hunchback; Il Gobo Maleto, or damned Hunchback. You know, affectionate. just like how you call your kid your adorable little shit. Other historians have written that these names may have been British and Italian wartime propaganda and not actual names used by the pilots, so keep that in mind. The SM-79-1 was classified as a medium bomber. SM-79-1s held little difference with their former civilian counterpart. A distinctive hump was added due to a fixed forward-firing gun. A ventral gondola toward the rear of the aircraft was made for the bombardier. The frame of the aircraft was a welded steel tube. The forward section was covered with duralumin sheet skinning. Plywood covered most of the upper fuselage, and fabric covered the sides and bottom. A fireproof bulkhead separated the nose engine with the forward crew compartment. The pilot and co-pilot sat beside each other with dual controls. It used a cantilever one-piece wing made entirely of wood. The 5,622-pound fuel tanks were between the center spars. The tail section was made of fabric-covered steel tubing. It was 51 feet long and had a wingspan of 69 nice feet. It flew with a crew of 6, a pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer or gunner, radio operator, bombardier, and a rear gunner, more of a waist gunner than anything. A small number of SM-79-1s were fitted with the 1,350 horsepower Alfa Romeo 135 RC32 18-cylinder air-cooled radial engine. However, the SM-79-1 was initially powered by 3 Alfa Romeo 126 RC34 9-cylinder radial engine, each rated at 780 horsepower for takeoff and 750 horsepower at 11,150 feet. 12.7mm Breda Safats were used throughout the aircraft, minus the 1 or 2 7.7mm Lewis guns situated toward the rear, mounted as side-facing flexible guns. In the center of the aircraft, the bombs were typically stored vertically. Alternatively, it could also carry 2 1,100-pound, 5 550-pound, or 12 220-pound bombs in the bomb bay. The ventral gondola found toward the rear underside of the aircraft housed the bombardier and his Joza bomb sight. The SM-79-1 had a max speed of 267 miles per hour at 13,120 feet and 224 miles per hour at sea level. At 9,840 feet, it had a cruising speed of 228 miles per hour and 233 miles per hour right around its service ceiling at 19,685 feet. The aircraft could reach 16,400 feet in 19 minutes, 45 seconds. It had a service ceiling of 21,325 feet, with a 2,755-pound bomb load. At 16,400 feet, the SM-79-1's typical cruising speed would be 211 miles per hour. With the same bomb load as previously mentioned, along with the same altitude and speed, the SM-79-1 had a range of 1,180 miles. Theoretically, empty, it had a max range of 2,050 miles. The success of the S-79 in Spain was used enthusiastically by propagandists, but this would backfire later as the Regia Aeronautica began to believe their own exaggerations. They believed that the speedy S-79 would be perfect for the coming war, a war fought at lightning speeds using unreachable bombers. A war that would be measured in weeks instead of years. Italian Bomber Command would receive a rude awakening, however, like how Britain learned that daylight bombing was a mistake. Or how the US learned that daylight bombing was a mistake. Or how Germany learned that daylight bombing... Well, you get the idea. The Regia Aeronautica quickly learned that against a new age of modern monoplane fighters, the S-79 was no match. The brave crews of the aging medium bomber performed daylight bombing raids against the British in the Mediterranean and North Africa, only to be chewed to pieces by British fighters. By 1939, 11 air groups had some 385 to 389 SM-79s based in Italy, Albania, and the Aegean Isles. By the time Italy entered World War II alongside Germany on June 10, 1940, they had increased that number to 594 SM-79-1s and 2s, 403 of which were operationally ready. To give some perspective, the Regia Aeronautica possessed 975 bombers total, That meant that little over half of Italy's bomber force was made up of SM-79s. The SM-79 would perform a handful of tasks at the start of the war, including aerial reconnaissance, level bombing, and was also seen providing close air support in North Africa and the Balkans. I believe my fellow aviation youth like to call that being a plane. Some of the first objectives undertaken by Italian bombers were joining in the invasion of France, while others were sent to pacify Malta. Malta proved to be a much more difficult job than expected, British resistance putting up a surprisingly effective barrier against Axis invasion of the territory. S-79s had difficulty both by day and night to land bombs on target. Strikes would be limited come fall of 1940. Italy was having similar luck down in North Africa. They had begun to use their S-79s to attack light British armor, which harassed Italian infantry. This was largely ineffective. When participating in level bombing strikes against British strongholds such as Alexandria, SM-79s would experience heavy losses against the heroes of the Battle of Britain, the Hawker Hurricane. Following the British counterattack in December of 1940, the Italian bomber force in the area had been devastated to the point of being basically wiped out.
Throughout this Libyan campaign, the Allied air forces have been completely masters of the sky, and they've created appalling havoc on former Axis aerodromes and harbors along the...
Additional S-79s were sent to North Africa, but they could not turn the tide of fighting in Africa. Their fall from grace followed them to their most important fight, attacking British shipping in the Mediterranean. Level bombing against ships was very ineffective, and the Italian 550-pound bomb was limited in its damage output. Furthermore, if British sea fires were nearby, then you could kiss goodbye to whatever was in the sky. SM-79s based in Albania had a little more luck compared to their counterparts. Pilots there praised their plane for its sturdiness. They assisted hard-pressed Italian infantry in the Balkans through tactical bombardment. The SM-79's presence there, however, was not significant enough to overcome the work the Luftwaffe was already doing in the area. This would be a common theme for the SM-79. A lack of available aircraft limiting its overall effectiveness. Regardless of being spread thin across multiple fronts, the SM-79 was Italy's workhorse, especially in the Mediterranean theater. Right before the end of 1940, the SM-79 would blossom into a new role, which would breathe new life into the aging plane. In this format, it was an outstanding machine. The SM-79 struggled to be an effective medium bomber and suffered greatly over the land against Allied fighters. When given the role of torpedo bomber, the SM-79 suddenly excelled. Its speed and ruggedness would aid it greatly, allowing for crews to quickly swoop in and get their torpedoes off. Contrary to Allied propaganda, the aircraft was quite capable in this newfound role. But let's back up a bit. Italy's situation in the Mediterranean logically led to an interest in torpedo bombing. Italy had been experimenting with aerial torpedo bombing as early as World War I, but had found little success. This would continue to be the case in the 1920s and 1930s. After 1940, Italy had learned that using its medium-altitude bombers to strike at ships in open waters was way too inefficient. Ships were able to avoid many of the bombs dropped. There also wasn't any real way to accurately drop the bombs, since their dispersion would be significant by the time they found the water. Since World War I, the Italian Navy and Air Force had fought over who would get the role of aerial torpedo bomber. Doesn't that sound familiar? Y'all. While infighting occurred between branches, the Air Force made certain to always be trying to achieve their goal of having land-based torpedo squadrons. In early 1937, after conducting tests using the S-81 to mixed results, the Regia Aeronautica selected the SM-79 for further trials. Savoia Marchetti had already tested the SM-79-1 as a torpedo bomber, making the transition quite painless. In March 1937, a special rack for carrying a 450mm naval torpedo, along with a special aiming device, was attached onto the SM-79-1. The torpedo was mounted onto the underbelly of the plane offset. Trials began at the northeastern town of Gorizia in November 1937. The S-79 proved it could be a successful platform for Italy's aerial-launched torpedo dreams. In March 1938, it was decided to add a second torpedo. Savoia Marchetti developed a twin launching system and tests began in August 1938. With 2 torpedoes, the SM-79-1's flying characteristics were extremely sensitive, and the performance drastically reduced. Despite this, the Italian Air Force decided to adopt the SM-79 as their land-based torpedo bomber. To improve the characteristics of the SM-79 when carrying 2 torpedoes, the aircraft was fitted with the more powerful 1,000 horsepower Piaggio P11 RC-40 engine. This would become the standard engine for the torpedo-bombing SM-79-2, which began production in October of 1939. While these changes did enhance performance when carrying 1 torpedo, it did little to sufficiently change the flying characteristics of the SM-79 while carrying 2. Therefore, carrying 2 was only ever really done when transporting them as cargo. Regia Aeronautica's Chief of Staff, Generale di Squadra Aerea, Francesco Pricolo, took the initiative to ensure that the Air Force would have the adequate resources to fuel their fledgling torpedo bomber unit. The SM-79 had already been chosen as the Air Force's torpedo bomber back in 1938. All that was needed now were torpedoes. Shortly after his appointment in November of 1939, Pricolo ordered 30 aerial torpedoes from Whitehead. Following Italy entering the war in June, Pricolo ordered a further 50 more, many being originally allocated for Germany. They were all to be ready by July 1940. Without his initiative, Italy would have had 0 aerial torpedoes ready for the critical early months of the war. On July 25, 1940, the Reparto Sperimentale Aeroscelerante was formed, and a few days later, the commanding officer of the unit hand-picked 5 crews. Between July 23rd and August 5th, the crews undertook training at Gorizia and became the Aeroscelerante. The Aeroscelerante were deployed just days after completing their training on August 10, 1940, to the North African campaign. They would arrive at El Adim, Libya, on the 12th. The Aeroscelerante would make their combat debut on August 15, 1940, while attacking British ships docked at Alexandria. Weather and AAA that night made striking the ships impossible for the SM-79s. One crew even had to make a forced landing behind enemy lines, torching their plane before eventually being captured. On September 9, 1940, the now group of 4 were assigned to the 278th Squadron, Quattro Gatti, the 4 cats, Italian slang for a gang of people. The new group would be the beginning of the Regia Aeronautica's torpedo bombing branch. Around a week later, on September 17, 1940, the unit would see their first success. While intercepting British ships tasked with bombarding Bardia, 2 SM-79s launched their torpedoes at the cruiser HMS Kent. One of their torpedoes struck aft of the vessel, near the propeller shafts on the ship's starboard side. 2 officers and 31 sailors were killed in the attack, and the ship was heavily damaged. She would not be seaworthy again until September the following year. Less than a month later, on October 14, 1940, an SM-79 would strike the cruiser HMS Liverpool after she had finished escorting cargo ships to Malta. The damage would result in her bow eventually falling off, my gosh, and many sailors were killed. The ship would be out of commission for over a year. On December 3, 1940, the cruiser HMS Glasgow was hit by an SM-79. This was the success of the SM-79. By the end of 1940, the 278th had flown 231 sorties and had made 113 torpedo attacks. In November 1940, a specialized torpedo bombing school was opened in Gorizia. 2 more would be opened in Naples. In 1943, 3 more were opened in Pisa. SM-79 torpedo pilots were revered in Italy, similar to how fighter pilots were in their respective countries. Their success would continue into the following year. During 1941, SM-79 torpedo bombers saw, quote, considerable success, end quote, against British convoys in the Mediterranean, many of whom were resupplying Malta. On July 23, 1941, SM-79s hit the cruiser HMS Manchester and sank the destroyer HMS Fearless. Although taking heavy losses on September 27, 1941, SM-79s managed to score a hit on the battleship HMS Nelson. During the British resupply missions dubbed Operation Harpoon and Pedestal in the summer of 1942, SM-79s managed to torment even more British ships. During Operation Harpoon, SM-79s hit several freighters, hit the cruiser HMS Liverpool, and sank a destroyer. During Operation Pedestal, German and Italian aircraft inflicted heavy losses to the British. However, Italy had lost 50 aircraft, including many expert torpedo pilots. But as soon as the SM-79 started to excel in its new role, their downfall befell them just as fast.
Then Germany...
Operation Torch began on November 8, 1942, with the American landings in West Africa. Italian torpedo bombing units shifted focus to attacking at sea and in harbors along the African coasts. Though, by this point, American and British fighters reigned supreme over the skies of the European theater. Italian losses were rising at an alarming rate. Air raids switched from daytime to night, but Allied radar made the decision ineffectual. From 1941 to 1942, Italian SM-79s had an average hit-to-loss ratio of 8 to 1. By 1943, that dropped to 1 hit for every 2.5 SM-79s lost. Attacks tapered off as supplies dwindled. By the summer of 1943, what remained of Italy's torpedo bombing capabilities could do little to stop the invasion of Sicily. In July 1943, an Italian SM-79 got a hit on the carrier HMS Indomitable. Although impressive, it was nowhere near enough to impede the invasion. The final torpedo attack against the Allies under the Regia Aeronautica occurred after the signing of the armistice on September 8, 1943. Let's take a look at this thing. The SM-79 continued to be used as a medium bomber. However, many SM-79-2s would now be used as effective torpedo bombers. SM-79 torpedo bombers received a new crew member, a naval officer, who would act as a ship spotter. The aircraft could sustain substantial damage and was praised for its excellent handling qualities, unless you're Yugoslavian, which shouldn't be an issue anymore because, you know. By the way, that joke will make sense in my next video, which is coming soon. The SM-79 was extremely well respected by their crews and was favored over other Italian medium bombers. It was powered by 3 Piaggio P11 RC40 14-cylinder air-cooled 2-row radial engines. I love saying the names of engines. It always makes you feel way cooler than you are. I bet scientists feel the same way when they say their complicated science-y words. Totally foreign to everyone, but completely benign to other scientists. Oh right, I need to be paying attention. The engine was rated at 1,000 horsepower at 13,120 feet. Now, in accordance with the fact that the SM-79 explored herself at college, small numbers of SM-79-2s were fitted with the 1,030 horsepower Fiat A80 RC41 radial engine. However, the Piaggio P11 was the standard engine for newly built SM-79-2s. Remember also that lots of the modifications made to each variant were moderate at best, so many SM-79s who might be considered 2 variants still had the Alfa Romeo 126 engine. One major change made to the Alfa Romeo 126 engine came in 1942 when they started to receive modifications for ethyl injection, boosting the engine's power for a short time. I told you this whole engine thing would get confusing. The armament package for the SM-79-2 was unchanged. Throughout 1941 and 1942, as more night missions were undertaken, flame-dampening exhausts and flash suppressors were added. The significant change compared with the SM-79-1 was the ability to effectively carry a torpedo. The SM-79-2 would carry 2 types of 450mm torpedo, the 375-pound warhead Silurificio Whitehead de Fiume, and the 352-pound warhead Silurificio Italiano di Napoli. These torpedoes would be launched at an altitude of approximately 320 feet at 185 miles per hour. By December 1941, the 440-pound warhead torpedoes were standard, and this type was even supplied to the Luftwaffe. The SM-79-2 would often only carry 1 torpedo into battle, carrying 2 typically only during ferrying missions. Loaded, the SM-79-2 weighed around 24,912 pounds, almost as much as your mother. The SM-79-2 had a max speed of 270 miles per hour at 12,000 feet, a max cruising speed of 255 miles per hour at 9,080 feet, could climb to 13,120 feet in 10 minutes 25 seconds, and had a service ceiling of 22,966 feet. With a payload of 2,755 pounds, the SM-79-2 would travel around 1,243 miles. When Italy capitulated on September 8, 1943, capitulated. Oh, I see here. When we absolutely curb-stomped them into the ground. No chance, not even a sweat broken. Let's go, boys! Sorry, I just had to translate that into American real fast. Anyway, little remained of the Regia Aeronautica. By late 1943, Italy had lost around 10,000 aircraft since entering the war in June 1940. When Italy surrendered, there were only around 877 planes left. The few SM-79s left in southern Italy escaped to the Allied lines to become part of the co-belligerent Air Force following the armistice. As part of the effort to end the war in Europe, the SM-79 performed a multitude of roles. As early as 1939, some SM-79s had been converted back to their original state as a high-speed, medium-distance passenger airliner and assisted high-ranking officers as transport planes, but performed other duties such as cargo transport too. They would drop leaflets over fascist northern Italy. They were even used sometimes to transport OSS agents during special assignments. Mussolini's RSI, Repubblica Sociale Italiana, to the north, would continue to use the SM-79. Under fascist control, they would predominantly serve as torpedo bombers. The Aviazione della Repubblica Sociale Italiana improved the SM-79 the best they could, using what little was left following Italy's surrender. The SM-79 bis, sometimes referred to as the SM-79-3 or S-579, the latter I haven't ever heard, but okay, was the final iteration of the model and was built, if you will, in small numbers in northern Italy. The SM-79-3 arrived in May of 1943 and was the culmination of many minor upgrades which had been made to the aircraft since 1941. The SM-79 bis was fitted with engines gauged more for low-altitude combat, perfect for its role as torpedo bomber. It had been ridden of the aft gondola, because it was a torpedo bomber exclusively now and no longer needed a bomber station. You try dropping a torpedo when the torpedo is right in front of your face. They had also replaced the forward-firing 50 caliber machine gun with a 20mm cannon, which the pilot could use as a flak deterrent during torpedo runs. Pick off some of those really annoying small pieces that come with the ship's kit. You know what I'm talking about, fellow modelers? Nope, wrong kind. Yeah, that's my gang. Ooh, a lot of my friends are gonna die before I even turn 25, aren't they? The RSI typically retrofitted SM-79-2s to bring them to BIS standards. They also used spare parts and hulls found in SIAI facilities to cobble up more SM-79-3s. All this work, though, did little to change the overall effectiveness of the aircraft against an overwhelming and more advanced Allied force. RSI operations were sporadic due to their limited numbers and supplies. SM-79 BIS torpedo squadrons attacked American targets off Anzio starting in early 1944, as well as attacking Gibraltar in the summer of the same year. Their success varied as much as they had previously. For example, Italy claimed victory over 4 ships, damaging 2 others during an offensive at Gibraltar, but this kind of success wasn't always the case. One of the last victories recorded by SM-79 pilots was in the Adriatic Sea, after sinking a 5,000-ton steamer in January of 1945. Put Put together with spare parts and differing from prior variants only in upgrades made mainly by pilots and crews themselves, the SM-79 bis was intended to fully embrace its role as a torpedo bomber. The forward-firing 50 cal of previous SM-79s was replaced with a forward-firing 20mm gun to be used as a flak deterrent. On a separate side tangent, if you would allow me, the balls it takes to point your nose at a huge floating platform of gun and start firing your much smaller gun at it must be immeasurable. Some other basic changes were made. The rear-facing gun, which protruded from the hump, received some additional protection. The waist gun windows were also fitted with an armored plate, no longer leaving the gunner exposed. Otherwise, very little else was changed. The standard engine for SM-79-2s were the Piaggio P11 engine. However, many were also fitted with the Alfa Romeo 126 engine. Starting in spring of 1943, many S-79s had their engines replaced with the Alfa Romeo 128 RC-18 engine. It differed importantly from the Alfa Romeo 126 in that it was most efficient at lower altitudes, perfect for the low-flying torpedo bomber. I would also guess, though, at this stage of the war, not all SM-79-3s could receive the change in engine, so I would assume that some still had the 126 and Piaggio engines. Overall, though, I don't expect speed stats to change much in compared to what we've discussed prior for the SM-79-2. Under the direction of famous Italian torpedo ace Buscaglia, the ventral gondola was removed, and a fuel tank was placed in the aircraft's fuselage, which significantly increased its range. After the war, SM-79s continued their role as high-value transports. In a country where many of their roads and railways had been destroyed, this was a very important task. While serving in the Aeronautica Militare Italiana, the SM-79 would be used as a target tug. She would finally be decommissioned in 1952, being replaced by the Beechcraft C-45. Even in the 1960s, SM-79 hulls scattered Italian scrapyards, but as of today, I have only been able to find 2 remaining, intact, examples of the aircraft, both in Italy. In total, somewhere between 1,200 and 1,300 SM-79s were produced for the Regia Aeronautica. In February 1941, the SM-79 was joined by its successor, the SM-84. Marchetti designed the aircraft to be the SM-79's replacement. This was never fully realized. The SM-84 was simply inadequate in comparison. When the SM-84 entered service, many bomber crews wished to remain with the SM-79. The aircraft was not very maneuverable, making it a poor torpedo bomber. In all aspects, the SM-79 was superior despite its age. Really fell off there, Marchetti. At the start of my research and the start of this video, I read a bunch of quotes praising the SM-79 as this unspoken hero of Italy. I don't necessarily think these quotes are outright wrong, but they do seem to exaggerate a bit. These quotes often aren't followed by any sort of explanation as to why the author believes the aircraft is the best torpedo bomber. Almost all of these quotes came from easily accessible coffee table reference books, and therefore will be seen by the majority of people. So it is a bit troubling. The authors are essentially giving the readers a big club, but not telling them where they found it. For all you know, the wood could be all rotted, and good luck fighting those cave skeletons when all you have in your hand is a pile of wood chips after one whack. I think what I found is that the legacy of the SM-79 is much more complicated than what can be said in a single quote. I do agree with one particular quote that I found, however. The SM-79, quote, was fully deserving of a place among the most famous of the Second World War's combat aircraft. End quote. Italy's bombers would never be equal in many regards to their counterparts in the Axis or Allied forces. Allied propaganda usually framed Italian aviation technology as less effective. This was despite the various world records held by Italian aircraft just prior to the war. but certainly there were some glaring issues that kept the SM-79 from being an extremely successful warplane. Italy was not able to sustain the attrition that World War II brought with it. Quantity was a constant issue with the SM-79. There were times where sections of the Italian front would have virtually no S-79s available because they were all fighting elsewhere. There were just never enough of them anywhere to make a huge impact. Italy certainly used building methods which other nations had long abandoned, like the tri-motor design. However, the quality of the aircraft was never as bad as how British propaganda portrayed it to be. Throughout my research, there was something that sort of ate away at my respect for aviation academia outside of academia. Again? That being the oversimplification of history and the fixation on more attractive topics. Although being more about a general issue in the history community, the situation reminded me of when I did my video on Japan during World War I. If you haven't seen that yet, go and check that out. The SM-79 operated within an often seldom spoken about theater of war. When it comes to World War II, arguably one of the most studied and talked about military conflicts, excuses on why theaters such as the Mediterranean aren't discussed just seem poor to me. I gave a little more slack for Japan and World War I being less known, but World War II? I mean, hell, I can't escape every schmuck who instantly goes into their headcanon of the war with me the moment they find out that I'm a modern historian. Ignoring a portion of the war is so frustrating. I was especially frustrated at the historical aviation community. Finding any amount of credible information on the history of this aircraft was difficult, and when I did find sources, many were comprehensively intensive reads, old, or simply hard to find. For being one of Italy's most famous and widely used aircraft of the war, the lack of accessible knowledge is based solely on it not being as sexy as other parts of World War II aviation history. Why would I talk about this thing and not the B-17 or the Corsair or the Zero for the millionth time? Because not writing about the S-79 would be like not writing about the B-17, and yet here we are. A lack of care leads to less information being available, which leads to misinformation being allowed to run free. And oh boy, did I run into a lot of that while doing research for this video, which is why it took so damn long to make. I could go on, but I'll close with this. A message I always tried to convey to my fellow historians, history bros. We aren't spreading these fascinating stories as sufficiently as we ought to be, putting emphasis on their relevance, or at the very least their uniqueness. This mindset that people don't want to know these interesting little corners of history is a bubble we need to pop so that more credible information is available and easily accessible. I'm very happy to have brought the story of the SM-79 to all of you, and I hope you enjoyed. Hey everybody, so real quick, if you like what I do here, please consider subscribing, liking the video, sharing the video, doing whatever you want with the video, because it really helps me out. And the more this channel grows, the more I will be able to do for this channel. So consider doing any number of those things. Thank you in advance. Some house chores. I have too many sources now to fit into the description of the video, so you should find a link to a Google Doc which will have all of the sources that I used to make this video. I know this video is very long. It took a fat minute to make. My bad. Most of that had to do with the research, which unfortunately had to be done in person most of the time, which requires taking time off of work, because I do have a full-time job, so it just meant that scheduling it out really pushed out the release date for this. My next video, their scripts are already completed, the research for them is already done, so they should be coming out much sooner. I am so excited to be sharing those, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much.